Did you know that the average person will spend nearly 218 minutes each day, that's over 55 days, per year putting off tasks they know they should be doing? Think about that for a moment. That's almost 2 months of your precious life annually, gone forever, sacrificed on the altar of procrastination. But here's what's truly shocking. You've been misunderstanding procrastination your entire life. What if I told you that you don't actually procrastinate tasks at all? What if the real truth is something far more profound? You are procrastinating versions of yourself. This single realization, once fully grasped, has the power to transform your productivity, your achievements, and ultimately, the very trajectory of your life. My friends, I've spent decades studying the minds and habits of the world's most successful individuals, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that this overlooked truth about procrastination is the invisible barrier standing between you and your greatest potential. While the masses struggle daily with to-do lists and productivity hacks that never seem to work, a select few have discovered this fundamental truth about human psychology that changes everything. When you delay writing that book, launching that business, or having that difficult conversation, you're not avoiding a task, you're avoiding becoming the person who has accomplished that task. You're rejecting a more capable, more successful version of yourself because of fear, doubt, or discomfort. And that, my friend, is the real tragedy of procrastination. The conventional wisdom has failed you. Time management techniques, accountability partners, even the strongest willpower, these approaches treat only the symptoms while the root cause continues to sabotage your dreams. Is it any wonder that despite all the productivity advice available today, procrastination remains as prevalent as ever? In this video, I'm going to reveal to you the exact psychological framework that explains why you've been procrastinating your best self. And more importantly, I'll provide you with the proven methodology to finally break through this barrier. You'll discover how to align your present actions with your future identity so powerfully that procrastination will become as foreign to you as hesitation is to a champion athlete in their moment of triumph. This isn't about working harder or managing your calendar more efficiently. This is about fundamental transformation of how you perceive yourself and your capabilities. It's about understanding the profound connection between identity and action that the most accomplished individuals throughout history have intuitively grasped. I promise you this, by the end of our time together, you will see procrastination not as a failure of discipline, but as a misalignment of identity. And once you make this crucial shift, you'll possess the most powerful tool for personal achievement ever developed, a tool that has created more millionaires, more leaders, and more fulfilled lives than perhaps any other psychological principle I've uncovered in my research. I must warn you, however, what I'm about to share isn't for everyone. It requires a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about yourself and to challenge deeply ingrained patterns of thinking. Many will hear these words but fail to act upon them, joining the vast majority who remain trapped in cycles of delay and regret. But if you're truly ready to step into your greatest potential, if you're prepared to meet the version of yourself that achieves, succeeds, and thrives without the burden of procrastination, then I invite you to join me on this journey of discovery. Before we continue, take a moment right now to subscribe to this channel. The principles I'm sharing have transformed countless lives, and I want to ensure you never miss the knowledge that could spark your own breakthrough moment. Hit that subscribe button. It's the first small action toward embracing the version of yourself who follows through with commitment. Now, let's pull back the curtain on this profound truth. You don't procrastinate tasks, you procrastinate versions of yourself. And once you truly understand this principle, you'll never view your habits, your potential, or your future in the same way again. Let me ask you something personal. Have you ever found yourself staring at an important task, perhaps a business proposal, a creative project, or even a simple decision that could improve your life, and despite knowing exactly what needs to be done, you simply don't do it? Instead, you find yourself scrolling through social media, handling minor tasks, or convincing yourself you'll get to it tomorrow. This isn't merely about poor time management. What you're experiencing runs far deeper than that. It's a psychological battle that silently wages within you every single day. And it's costing you more than just time, it's costing you the life you truly desire to live. Consider this. When you procrastinate on launching that business venture, you're not just postponing a task, you're rejecting the identity of being an entrepreneur. When you delay starting that fitness routine, you're not avoiding exercise, you're avoiding becoming a healthy, disciplined person. The task itself is merely the surface. What lies beneath is the profound discomfort of identity transformation. Most people never realize this critical distinction. They believe procrastination is simply a behavior problem that can be solved with better schedules, reminder apps, or stronger willpower. They try technique after technique, yet find themselves caught in the same cycle year after year. Does this sound familiar to you? If so, you're experiencing what I've observed in countless individuals: a fundamental misunderstanding of what procrastination truly is. The conventional approaches fail because they target the symptom, not the cause. They attempt to force action without addressing the internal resistance to becoming a different version of yourself. This resistance is powerful precisely because it operates below your conscious awareness. It's not logical. It's deeply emotional and tied to your sense of self. Let me illustrate this with a story about a man I once mentored. We'll call him Thomas. Thomas was brilliant, educated, and possessed all the knowledge required to write the book he'd been talking about for years. He bought journals, set up writing schedules, even rented a cabin for a weekend retreat. Yet the book remained unwritten. When I finally helped him see that he wasn't avoiding writing, he was avoiding becoming an author with all the vulnerability and judgment that identity entailed, something remarkable happened. The mental barrier dissolved, and within 6 months, his manuscript was complete. What was the difference? Thomas stopped trying to force the task and instead embraced the identity transformation required to accomplish it. He confronted his fear of being seen, judged, and possibly rejected as an author. Once he made peace with that new version of himself, the procrastination vanished. This pattern plays out every day across the world. People aren't procrastinating work, they're procrastinating growth. They're avoiding the discomfort that comes with stepping into a new, more capable, more visible version of themselves. The majority will never overcome this barrier because they never identify it correctly. They remain focused on external productivity rather than internal transformation. The contrast couldn't be clearer. Those who struggle perpetually with procrastination are fighting the wrong battle, while those who triumph have shifted their focus entirely. The struggling majority tries to force themselves to do things that feel misaligned with their current identity. The successful minority, however, focuses first on embracing the identity of the person who would naturally perform those actions. Think about someone you know who seems effortlessly productive in an area where you struggle. What's the real difference between you? Is it merely that they have more willpower, better systems, or greater discipline? Or could it be that they fully embrace the identity that aligns with those actions, making what seems difficult to you feel natural to them? Consider the aspiring entrepreneur who procrastinates on making sales calls. Is it really the phone that intimidates them? Of course not. It's the uncomfortable transition from seeing themselves as someone who avoids rejection to someone who actively seeks opportunities despite potential rejection. The task itself is trivial. The identity shift is everything. Or the writer who perpetually delays finishing their novel? Is it truly the writing that's difficult? Rarely. It's accepting the vulnerability of putting one's creation and, by extension, oneself into the world for judgment. It's transitioning from someone with potential to someone who must stand by their actual work. This pattern repeats endlessly across all domains of life. The fitness goals abandoned by February. The career changes perpetually researched but never pursued. The relationships that remain superficial because deeper connection requires a more authentic version of yourself. In each case, it's not the action being avoided, but the becoming. The truth is both liberating and challenging. Your procrastination is not a character flaw or a lack of discipline. It's a sign that you're standing at the threshold of meaningful personal growth, hesitating to step through. The task you're avoiding is merely the doorway to a different version of yourself. And it's that transformation, not the task, that creates resistance. As you begin to see this pattern in your own life, you'll notice something remarkable. The areas where you procrastinate most severely are precisely the areas that hold the greatest potential for your personal evolution. They represent the gap between who you currently are and who you're capable of becoming. This realization alone has profound implications for how you approach your goals and challenges. But understanding the problem is only the beginning. The question remains, how do you bridge this gap? How do you embrace these new versions of yourself instead of avoiding them? How do you transform procrastination from your greatest obstacle into your most powerful opportunity for growth? That's precisely what we'll explore next. What I'm about to share with you isn't another temporary fix or productivity hack. It's a fundamental shift in how you approach personal change and methodology. I've refined through decades of studying the psychological principles that separate extraordinary achievers from the merely average. This approach has transformed the lives of countless individuals across every field of endeavor, from business titans to world-class artists. The solution lies in what I call identity-based action, a systematic approach to personal transformation that resolves procrastination at its root cause rather than merely treating its symptoms. While the masses continue to struggle with to-do lists and time management techniques, this method addresses the deeper psychological reality of why you delay your most important work. When I first began researching the habits of highly successful people for my books, I expected to find superior planning systems or extraordinary willpower. Instead, I discovered something far more fundamental. These individuals had mastered the art of becoming the person who would naturally take the actions they desired. They understood intuitively what science has only recently begun to confirm, that sustainable behavior change flows from identity change, not the reverse. Consider Henry Ford. Before he revolutionized manufacturing, he had to first see himself as a pioneer and innovator, not merely as someone who built automobiles. Or Thomas Edison, who didn't simply perform experiments. He embodied the identity of an inventor through over 1,000 patents. These men didn't force themselves to take action against their nature. They aligned their actions with how they already saw themselves. This perspective is profoundly different from conventional approaches. Most methods ask you to push against your current identity, creating internal conflict and resistance. Identity-based action instead shows you how to evolve your self-perception first, making previously difficult actions feel natural and aligned with who you are becoming. What makes this approach uniquely powerful is that it works with your psychology rather than against it. Your mind is designed to seek consistency between your actions and your self-image. When you try to force actions that contradict how you see yourself, your subconscious creates resistance in the form of procrastination. But when you deliberately evolve your identity first, those same actions become almost effortless expressions of your new self-image. I've spent years refining these principles through observation and application. I've witnessed individuals transform from chronic procrastinators to consistent achievers, not through greater discipline or willpower, but through strategic identity shifts that align their desired actions with their sense of self. Let me be clear, this isn't about positive thinking or affirmations. This is a practical, systematic approach to personal evolution based on psychological principles that have stood the test of time. It's about strategically becoming the person who would naturally take the actions you've been postponing. What you're about to learn represents the convergence of ancient wisdom and modern psychology insights that the most successful individuals throughout history have intuitively applied, now structured into a framework anyone can implement. While others continue to treat procrastination as a behavior problem, you'll understand it as an identity misalignment that can be systematically addressed. Few people understand what I'm about to share with you. Even among those who study psychology and personal development, these principles remain largely overlooked or misunderstood. Yet they represent perhaps the most direct path to overcoming procrastination and achieving your highest potential. Imagine for a moment what your life would look like if procrastination no longer held you back. Picture yourself taking consistent action toward your most important goals, not because you're forcing yourself, but because those actions feel like natural expressions of who you are. Envision the compound effect of this shift over months and years, the achievements, growth, and opportunities that would naturally flow from this transformation. This isn't just possible, it's inevitable once you understand and apply the principles of identity-based action. You're about to discover a new path forward, one that resolves the inner conflict that has kept you stuck for so long. As we move into exploring these principles in depth, I want you to approach what follows with both openness and discernment. These concepts may challenge what you've previously believed about personal change and productivity. They may require you to reconsider fundamental assumptions about willpower, discipline, and achievement. But for those willing to truly understand and apply them, they offer the key to breaking free from procrastination's grip once and for all. You stand at a crossroads. Continue down the path of conventional approaches that treat the symptoms rather than the cause, or embrace this deeper understanding of procrastination as an identity issue. The choice you make will determine whether you continue to delay your potential or finally step into the versions of yourself you've been postponing. The transformation begins now. The journey from procrastination to purposeful action requires understanding several fundamental principles that govern the relationship between identity and behavior. These principles aren't mere theories, they are the practical foundation upon which lasting transformation is built. Let me walk you through each one, revealing how they create the framework for overcoming the procrastination of your potential self. The first principle is what I call the identity precedes action law. Most people have this backward. They believe that if they can force themselves to act differently, they'll eventually become different. This approach creates constant internal friction and inevitably fails. The truth is that sustainable action flows naturally from a congruent identity. When you genuinely see yourself as a certain type of person, actions aligned with that identity require dramatically less willpower. Think of your mind as fertile soil. Your identity is a seed, and your actions are the fruit. You cannot harvest what hasn't been planted and nurtured first. When you attempt to produce actions without the corresponding identity, you're essentially trying to harvest without planting, an exercise in frustration and futility. Consider the difference between someone who says, "I'm trying to quit smoking," versus someone who declares, "I'm not a smoker." The first person still holds the identity of a smoker attempting a difficult change. The second has already shifted their fundamental self-perception. For the first, each declined cigarette is an act of deprivation. For the second, It's simply an affirmation of who they already are. The action is identical, but the psychological experience is worlds apart. I witnessed this principle dramatically illustrated in the life of a businessman. I once coached a man who had procrastinated for years on writing a book about his industry expertise, despite setting deadlines, hiring editors, even blocking time on his calendar. The manuscript remained perpetually unfinished. The breakthrough came when he stopped trying to do the writing and instead began consciously stepping into the identity of being an author. He started frequenting cafes where writers worked, joined a writers group, and reorganized his office to reflect his authorial identity. Within 3 months, he had completed what years of forced effort had failed to produce. The action flowed naturally from the embraced identity. Your current patterns of procrastination reveal the gap between the actions you desire and the identity you currently hold. Close that gap, and procrastination dissolves not through force, but through alignment. The second principle is what I term the comfort zone paradox. The human mind is designed to seek consistency and familiarity to maintain the status quo of your current identity. This creates a paradoxical situation where even desired changes feel threatening, because they require you to become someone different than who you currently know yourself to be. Your comfort zone is like a psychological immune system, protecting your current identity from change-even positive change. When you procrastinate on actions that would lead to growth, your mind is actually protecting your familiar self-concept from the uncertainty of transformation. Imagine your current identity as a home you've lived in for years. You may desire a more beautiful, spacious home, your potential self, but moving requires leaving the familiar, packing up possessions, and stepping into unfamiliar territory. Procrastination is like continuously postponing the move while complaining about your current living conditions. I recall a talented executive who repeatedly delayed applying for positions that matched her capabilities, instead remaining in a role far beneath her potential. Her procrastination wasn't about the application process, it was her mind's way of preserving her comfortable identity as a competent middle manager rather than risking becoming an executive who might fail. Only when she recognized this pattern and deliberately expanded her comfort zone by taking small identity-affirming steps did she break through this barrier. Understanding this paradox reveals why willpower alone is insufficient. You're not merely fighting distraction or laziness. You're battling your mind's fundamental drive to maintain identity consistency. The solution isn't to force yourself outside your comfort zone, but to gradually expand it through strategic identity shifts that feel both challenging and achievable. The third principle I've observed across thousands of success stories is the future self-integration concept. Procrastination often represents a disconnection between your present self and your future self. You prioritize immediate comfort over long-term benefit because your future self feels like a stranger rather than a continuation of who you are now. This disconnection manifests as a form of psychological myopia where the future consequences of procrastination appear distant and abstract while the immediate discomfort of action looms large. The more vividly you can connect with your future identity, the less you'll procrastinate on actions that benefit that future self. Consider how differently you'd approach decisions if your future self were sitting beside you, experiencing the consequences of your choices in real time. The gap between present action and future outcome is where procrastination thrives. I worked with an entrepreneur who consistently procrastinated on making crucial decisions for his growing business. Through guided visualization exercises, he developed a vivid connection with his future self, the leader of a thriving enterprise 5 years ahead. He began asking, "What would that version of me advise in this situation?" This simple practice bridged the gap between present comfort and future benefit. transforming his decision-making process entirely. Your future self is not a separate person, it's you, shaped by the decisions you make today. When you procrastinate actions aligned with your aspirations, you're essentially prioritizing your present identity over your potential future identity. Bridge this gap, and procrastination loses much of its power. The fourth principle, perhaps most powerful of all, is what I call identity investment. This principle recognizes that identity isn't fixed, but fluidized, continuously shaped by the actions you take and the experiences you accumulate. Every action is either an investment in your current identity or in a new, emerging identity. Think of your identity as a financial portfolio, just as regular deposits grow your financial assets over time. Consistent identity-affirming actions strengthen your self-perception in that area. The procrastinator makes sporadic, inconsistent investments with minimal returns, while the achiever makes regular, strategic investments that compound over time. I recall a writer who struggled with procrastination on his novel for years. His breakthrough came when he shifted from focusing on completing the book to making daily identity investments in being a writer. He began with just 15 minutes of writing each morning, not primarily to advance the manuscript, but to strengthen his identity as someone who writes daily. These small, consistent investments gradually transformed his self-perception, making longer writing sessions feel natural rather than forced. This principle explains why attempting dramatic overnight changes often fails, while small, consistent actions succeed. The small actions might seem insignificant in terms of immediate progress, but their cumulative effect on your identity creates a foundation for sustainable change. Each time you take action aligned with your desired identity of unnoticed action, you're making a deposit that strengthens that self-perception. Each time you procrastinate, you're inadvertently reinforcing your current identity and making future action more difficult. The compounding effect of these identity investments, whether positive or negative, explains why procrastination tends to either improve or worsen over time, rarely remaining static. These four principles: identity precedes action, the comfort zone paradox, future self-integration, and identity investment, create a comprehensive framework for understanding and overcoming procrastination at its source. Together, they reveal that procrastination is not a character flaw or simple habit, but a symptom of identity misalignment that can be systematically addressed. Let me ask you this: which of these principles resonates most deeply with your experience of procrastination? Take a moment right now to leave a comment sharing which aspect of this framework speaks most directly to your situation. Your insight might be exactly what another viewer needs to hear to experience their own breakthrough. As these principles have demonstrated, procrastination is fundamentally about the versions of yourself you're unwilling or afraid to become. The tasks themselves are merely the visible manifestation of a deeper psychological process. When you shift your focus from the actions you're avoiding to the identity transitions you're resisting, you address the root cause rather than the symptom. The question now is not, how do I force myself to complete these tasks, but rather, how do I become the person who would naturally take these actions? This shift in perspective changes everything, transforming procrastination from a frustrating obstacle into a signpost pointing toward your most important opportunities for growth. Now, I can almost hear the skepticism forming in your mind. This sounds compelling, but my procrastination feels different. It feels like simple laziness or poor time management. This is precisely what makes procrastination so insidious. It disguises itself as a behavior problem when it's actually an identity issue. The mind creates rational-sounding objections to protect itself from the discomfort of transformation. You might be thinking, if identity is so important, why have all the productivity systems I've tried failed to address it? The answer is straightforward. Most productivity approaches were designed by naturally productive people who never faced significant identity barriers. They created systems that work wonderfully for those who already identify as productive, organized individuals, but these systems often fail those who need them most because they don't address the underlying identity misalignment. Perhaps you're wondering, isn't this just a convenient excuse for lack of discipline? Shouldn't I just push through regardless of how I feel? This objection reflects our culture's deep misunderstanding of human psychology. Sustainable change never comes from perpetual force, it comes from alignment. The most disciplined individuals aren't constantly fighting themselves. They've aligned their actions with their identity so thoroughly that discipline becomes almost effortless. Consider the difference between someone who exercises because they should versus someone who exercises because they see themselves as an active, healthy person. The first experiences internal resistance each time, making consistency nearly impossible. The second experiences exercise as a natural expression of who they are, making consistency almost inevitable. The action is identical. The psychological experience is entirely different. But what about when I need to do things that don't align with any identity I want to embrace? This practical concern arises frequently, especially regarding mundane but necessary tasks. The answer lies in connecting these tasks to a more meaningful identity. The person who values being responsible finds it easier to handle administrative tasks than someone attempting to force themselves through willpower alone. The identity of being dependable, resourceful, or efficiency-minded can transform even mundane actions into expressions of who you are rather than burdens to overcome. You may also wonder, how long does this identity shift take? I need results now. This reveals our cultural impatience with psychological processes. The truth is that some identity shifts can happen remarkably quickly, sometimes in moments of powerful insight, while others develop gradually through consistent reinforcement. The speed depends on various factors, including how deeply entrenched your current identity is and how believable the new identity feels. What most fail to realize is that even overnight successes in changing habits are usually preceded by invisible identity work, a gradual accumulation of self-perception that reaches a tipping point. The question isn't whether identity change takes time, everything worthwhile does, but whether you'll continue investing in an identity that perpetuates procrastination or begin investing in one that naturally produces action. Some of you might be thinking, I've tried changing how I see myself before, and it didn't last. This common experience reflects attempting identity change through affirmations or positive thinking alone without the strategic implementation these principles require. Identity isn't changed merely by thinking differently, it's changed through the combination of shifted perspective, aligned environment, and consistent identity-reinforcing actions, all of which we'll address in implementation. Have you considered that your resistance to this approach might itself be a form of procrastination? Could you be avoiding the identity of someone who takes personal responsibility for their psychological patterns? This reflection isn't meant to create guilt, but to illuminate how deeply procrastination can embed itself in our response to potential solutions. The most powerful objection, the one I've encountered countless times in my work, is simply, what if I fail? What if I try to become this new version of myself and discover I can't? This fear of identity failure is profound precisely because it threatens not just what you do, but who you are. Yet, consider this. By procrastinating, you're already failing, just doing so slowly enough to avoid confronting it directly. The choice isn't between potential failure and guaranteed success, it's between potential growth and guaranteed stagnation. These objections are natural protective responses as your mind confronts the possibility of change. They don't indicate that this approach is wrong for you, but rather that it's touching on precisely the areas where growth is most needed. The question is whether you'll allow these objections to become yet another form of procrastinating your potential, or whether you'll recognize them as signposts pointing toward your most important opportunities for transformation. Now that we've explored these fundamental principles and addressed common objections, let's examine how they work together as an integrated system for transformation. Understanding these concepts individually is valuable, but their true power emerges when you implement them as a unified approach to overcoming procrastination. Imagine your potential as a magnificent oak tree. The identity precedes action principle represents the acorn, the essential seed from which everything grows. The comfort zone paradox is the soil initially resistant, yet ultimately necessary for growth. Future self-integration is the sunlight drawing the seedling upward toward its potential. Identity investment is the water and nutrients, the consistent resources that enable steady development. Together, these elements don't just address procrastination. They nurture the emergence of your fullest self. This integrated approach transforms procrastination from an enemy to be defeated into a compass pointing toward your most important growth opportunities. When you notice yourself procrastinating, rather than becoming frustrated or self-critical, you can ask, what version of myself am I avoiding becoming through this delay? What identity shift is being required of me here? The implementation follows a natural progression. First, you identify the specific version of yourself you've been procrastinating. Perhaps it's the public speaker, the disciplined entrepreneur, the vulnerable partner, or the focused creator. Next, you consciously begin stepping into this identity through small, consistent actions specifically designed as identity investments rather than merely task completion. Simultaneously, you gradually expand your comfort zone by creating environments and associations that normalize and reinforce this emerging identity. Throughout this process, you maintain a vivid connection with your future self, making decisions from their perspective rather than solely from your current viewpoint. Let me offer a practical framework for implementing this integrated approach. Begin each morning by connecting with your aspirational identity not through vague affirmations, but through specific visualization of how this version of yourself navigates the day ahead. See through their eyes, feel their confidence, and imagine their natural approach to challenges. Identify one small but significant identity action you can take today, something that represents an investment in becoming this version of yourself. The size of the action matters less than its symbolic alignment with your emerging identity. Create environmental triggers that reinforce your developing self-perception. This might include physical workspace adjustments, strategic reminders, or restructuring your surroundings to reflect who you're becoming rather than who you've been. Practice identity-based decision-making throughout the day by asking, what would the version of me I'm growing into do in this situation? Then take action from that perspective rather than defaulting to habitual responses. Each evening, reflect not primarily on what you accomplished, but on how your actions either strengthened or weakened your connection to your aspirational identity. This shifts focus from pure productivity to identity reinforcement. This framework transforms abstract principles into concrete daily practices. The power lies not in any single element, but in their combined, consistent application. Over time, what begins as conscious practice becomes unconscious pattern, and what once required effort gradually becomes natural expression. The most remarkable aspect of this integrated approach is its compound effect over time. Just as financial investments grow exponentially through compounding, identity investments create accelerating returns. The person you become through consistent identity-aligned action develops capabilities and perspectives that make previously challenging actions increasingly effortless. Consider how differently you might approach your most important goals if, rather than forcing yourself to take action against internal resistance, you first became the person who would naturally take those actions. The procrastination that has plagued you would gradually dissolve not through greater force, but through deeper alignment between who you are and what you do. This isn't magical thinking or mere theory. It's the practical application of psychological principles that govern human behavior and potential. The most successful individuals I've studied throughout my career didn't achieve greatness by forcing themselves to act against their nature. They achieved it by evolving their nature to align with their aspirations. The version of yourself that you've been procrastinating, the writer, leader, creator, or achiever already exists as potential within you. These principles, applied with consistency and insight, provide the systematic pathway to bringing that potential self into reality. You stand now at a critical juncture, one that will determine whether the insights you've gained become transformative action or join the graveyard of good ideas never implemented. The difference between those who break free from procrastination and those who remain trapped is not knowledge but application. The principles I've shared with you today have transformed countless lives, but only when applied with commitment and consistency. Today, not tomorrow, not when you feel more ready, not when circumstances seem perfect, is the day to begin this transformation. Each moment you delay is not merely postponing action. It's actively reinforcing the identity of someone who procrastinates their potential. The cost of waiting is far greater than the discomfort of beginning. Ask yourself, what version of yourself have you been postponing through procrastination? Name it specifically. The writer, the entrepreneur, the leader, the person who prioritizes their health. Identify that potential self clearly in your mind. Now, what is one small but significant action you could take in the next 24 hours that would represent an investment in becoming that version of yourself? Not an action designed to complete a task, but an action designed to strengthen a new identity. Commit to that single step not as an obligation but as a declaration of who you're choosing to become. Remember that transformation is ultimately your responsibility alone. No technique, system, or mentor, not even the principles I've shared today, can do this work for you. They can illuminate the path, but only you can walk it. The question is not whether these principles work, but whether you will work them with the consistency they require. The procrastination you've experienced isn't a character flaw or moral failing, it's been a misalignment between your actions and your evolving identity. By addressing this root cause rather than merely treating symptoms, you can transform not just what you do, but who you become. Imagine for a moment looking back 1 year from today, having consistently applied these principles, the person you would be, the achievements you would have accumulated, the confidence you would have developed, all because you chose to procrastinate no longer on becoming your potential self. Today is the day to make that choice. Not with dramatic declarations or unsustainable bursts of effort, but with quiet determination to align your actions with the person you know you can become. The pathway from procrastination to purposeful action begins with a single, identity-affirming step, and that step awaits your decision now. I invite you to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and to leave a comment sharing the specific version of yourself you've been procrastinating and the identity-affirming action you commit to taking today. Your declaration might be exactly what inspires someone else to begin their own transformation. Remember, you don't procrastinate tasks, you procrastinate versions of yourself. The moment you truly understand and apply this principle is the moment you begin the journey from who you've been to who you're capable of becoming. The version of yourself that achieves, creates, and thrives isn't in some distant future, it's waiting now for your decision to bring it into reality. The choice is yours. What will you decide?